The animation depicts a woman riding a bicycle, her hair blowing in the wind as she waves. In this lesson, you'll build an armature, a skeleton, and then animate the motion of limbs pedaling the bicycle. You'll also animate the wheels and pedals turning. Double-click the 06start.fla file in the Lesson 6 06 Start folder to open the initial project file in Adobe Animate. Choose File, Save As. Name the file 06_workingcopy.fla and save it to the 06 Start folder. Building your first armature to animate a character. In your FLA file, view the graphics for the bicycle and Ruby, the rider, that have already been created and placed on the stage for you. The pieces of the rider have been positioned so it's easy to see how they relate to each other. Keeping some space between the pieces will make connecting the bones for your armature easier. Don't worry that Ruby doesn't look exactly right, because you'll move her pieces together in a later step. Click the Edit Toolbar option to add the Bone tool to the Tools panel. And then select the Bone tool. Click the middle of Ruby's chest and drag with the Bone tool to the top of her right upper arm. It may help to zoom in a bit so you can see exactly what you're doing. Release the mouse button. The first bone is defined in a new armature. Animate shows the bone as a straight line with a square at its base joint and a circle at its tip joint. Each bone is defined from one joint to the next. In the timeline, your newly created armature is automatically put in a new layer with a new icon and the default name of armature with a number after it. This special type of layer keeps your armatures separate from other objects in the timeline, such as graphics or motion tweens. Now click the end of your first bone at Ruby's shoulder and drag it to the top of her lower arm, her elbow, and release. Your second bone is defined. Select the Selection tool and experiment with grabbing the last bone in the chain at Ruby's right forearm and move it up and down the stage. Because the bones connect the whole arm to Ruby's torso, moving the lower arm causes the upper arm and torso to move as well in a somewhat unnatural manner, but you'll learn to constrain joints for better control. Extending your armature. With the Bone tool selected, click the base of your very first bone in Ruby's chest and drag the Bone tool to the top of her other upper arm. The first bone is considered your root bone. Release the mouse button. Continue creating bones to her lower arm. Your armature now extends in two directions, one for Ruby's left arm and one for her right. Click the base of your very first bone in Ruby's chest and drag the Bone tool to the middle of her pelvis. Extend the armature from the pelvis down to both of Ruby's lower legs. The pelvis will branch off to the right and left legs, lower legs, and finally the black pedals. You can move objects around to make things easier to connect. Lastly, connect the torso to Ruby's head and her pelvis to the seat of the bicycle. Your armature now connects all the pieces of Ruby, including her bicycle, and defines how each piece can rotate and move in relation to other pieces in the armature. Moving the bones of the armature. Select the Selection tool. Hold down the Option or Alt key and move Ruby's left upper arm closer to her body. You can also use the Free Transform tool. The upper arm is repositioned, but the armature remains intact. Hold down the Option or Alt key and move all the parts of Ruby's body and the bicycle closer together to eliminate the gaps in her joints. The character and her armature should look similar to the following: rearranging the stacking order. Select the Selection tool and shift select the 3 movie clips that make up Ruby's back leg, including the pedal. Choose Modify, Arrange, Send to Back. Or you could right-click and select Arrange, Send to Back. The selected bones of the armature move to the bottom of the stacking order, so her left leg is now behind the bicycle, and the bicycle seat now sticks out in between her legs. Select the 2 clips that compose Ruby's right arm, and use the Modify Arrange command to move the objects to the front. Or right-click and use Modify Arrange to send her other arm to the back. Select Ruby's head and choose Modify, Arrange, Bring to Front. The head of the armature moves to the top of the stacking order, so Ruby's head is now above her neck. Select the Selection tool and move the armature around to see how Ruby's right and left arms and legs move behind or in front of her body, and make any corrections as needed. Posing your armature. Using the Selection tool, drag Ruby's right foot to the top of the pink circle. This represents the path of the pedaling motion. Move the black pedals that are attached to her feet so they are parallel to the ground. As you drag her leg and pedal, the bones that are connected to them also move. If you have trouble controlling the armature, don't worry. It takes practice, and in the following sections, you'll learn more tricks and tips to constrain or isolate certain joints for precision positioning. Move Ruby's left foot and pedal to the bottom of the pink circle. Try to keep the black pedal on the curve of the circle. Move Ruby's arms and position them on the handlebars of the bicycle. Your first pose is completed in frame 1 of your armature layer. Isolating the rotation of individual bones. Select the back pedal. With the Selection tool, drag the pedal. The leg moves to follow the motion of the pedal. Now, holding the Shift key, drag the petal. The petal rotates around the leg, but the rest of the armature doesn't move. The Shift key isolates the rotation of the selected bone. Holding down the Shift key helps you isolate the rotations of individual bones so that you can position your poses exactly like you want them. Pinning individual bones. Select the Selection tool. Select the bone to the bicycle frame. The bone becomes highlighted, indicating it is selected. In the Properties panel, set the Pin option. The bicycle is fixed to the stage in the current position. A white circle with a black dot appears in the joint to indicate it is pinned. You can also select a joint and click it when your cursor changes to the icon of a push pin. The selected bone will be pinned. Click again to unpin the bone. The armature motion is different when using the pin versus using the Shift key. The Shift key isolates an individual bone and all the rest of the bones connected to it. When you pin a bone, the pin bone remains fixed, but you're free to move all the child bones. Disabling the rotation of joints. Select the bone that connects Ruby's head with her torso. The bone is highlighted. In the Properties panel, deselect the Enable option for the joint rotation section. The circle around the joint at the head of the selected bone disappears, which means that the joint no longer is able to rotate. Now drag Ruby's head. Her head no longer rotates around the joint in the torso, but it can still rotate around the last joint. Constraining the range of rotation. Select the bone that connects Ruby's chest to her left upper arm. The bone becomes highlighted. In the Properties panel, deselect the Enable option in the Joint Rotation section. Rotation around the joint in the torso is disabled, so the upper arm cannot move as wildly around the torso. Select the child bone from the upper arm to the lower arm. In the Properties panel, select Constrain option in the Joint Rotation section. The angle indicators change from a full circle to a partial circle on the joint, showing the minimum and maximum allowable angles and the current position of the bone. In the Properties panel, set the left offset rotation to -90 degrees and the right offset to 90 degrees. Drag the arm. You can now move the arm, but its rotation is constrained to the extremes of rotating straight up or straight down, preventing your armature from being positioned in unrealistic positions and making it much easier to control and position your poses. Inserting poses. On the timeline, select frame 6. Be sure to enable auto keyframe for this to work. Move Ruby's foot and petals so the front one is the northwest position around 1 o'clock. A new pose or keyframe is inserted at frame 6. Move the other foot backwards as well. Opposite the other foot. On the timeline, select frame 12. Move Ruby's feet and petals so that the front one is at the west position around 3 o'clock. Continue adding new poses every 6 frames and positioning Ruby's feet along the pink circle. You'll end up with 9 poses, each at every 15 minutes of a clock face, along 48 frames. The first and last pose will be the same. If you've made mistakes like me, you may need to adjust the positioning of these keyframes. Select Loop Playback at the top of the timeline and extend the markers to cover the entire animation span, from frame 1 to frame 48. Click the Play button at the top of the timeline to view your animation loop. Adding a wave and head nod. Select frame 18 and move Ruby's left arm up in the air to wave. Select frame 24 and move her forearm to a straighter position. Select frame 30 and move Ruby's left arm up and angle her forearm close to her head to complete the wave. In one of the poses, you choose. Rotate her head slightly so Ruby gives a nod during the wave. Defining bones inside a shape. In the library, open the Girl Bicycle Assets folder and double-click the Ruby Head movie clip symbol. In symbol editing mode, note that our hair is in the bottom layer. Choose the Bone tool. Click inside the shape starting from the right side and drag a bone inside the hair part of the way. Animate creates an armature inside Ruby's hair and moves it to its own armature layer. Click the end of the first bone and drag out the next bone a little farther down toward the tip of the hair. A second bone is defined. Continue building the hair armature with a total of about 4 bones. When the armature is complete, use the Selection tool and drag the last bone to see how the deformation of the hair follows the bones of the armature. Animating the hair. Select frame 40 in all 3 layers. And choose Insert, Timeline, Frame. Animate adds frames up to frame 40 on the timeline, making the number of frames in the nested animation of Ruby's hair different from the main timeline of the pedaling. This will make the animations not synchronized for a more natural loop. Move the playhead on the timeline to frame 15. Move the armature in Ruby's hair to deform it. You can also hold down the Shift key as you move a bone to isolate its rotation. Animate inserts a new pose for Ruby's hair at frame 15. Move the playhead to frame 25. Move the armature in Ruby's hair to position it in a different way. Animate inserts a new pose for Ruby's hair at frame 25. Hold down the Alt-Option key and drag the first pose to the last frame. Animate copies the first pose into frame 40 so the animation will end at the same place it began. Exit symbol editing mode and test your movie. Ruby's hair waves and blows as she pedals her bicycle. To complete the animation, add an armature to Ruby's bangs in the bangs layer and animate the wisp of fluttering hair in her face. Adding springiness to Ruby's hair. In the library, double-click the Ruby head movie clip symbol to enter symbol editing mode. Within symbol editing mode, select the last bone in Ruby's hair. In the Properties panel, in the Spring section, set the strength to 100. The last bone has the maximum spring since the tip is the most flexible part of the whole armature and would have the most independent motion. Select the next bone in the armature. You can simply click it on the stage, or you can navigate up the armature hierarchy with the arrows in the Properties panel. In the Properties panel, in the Spring section, set strength to around 70. The middle of the bone is a little less flexible than the tip, so has a smaller strength value. Select the next bone. In the Properties panel, in the Spring section, set the strength to around 30. The base of the hair armature is less flexible than the middle, so it has an even smaller strength value. The effects of the spring feature are more apparent when there are additional frames on the timeline after the armature's final pose. The additional frames allow you to see the residual bouncing effect after the last pose. Add frames to all the layers until frame 100. Test your movie. Ruby's hair moves from the first pose to the next, but even past the last pose, the hair continues to sway slightly. The back and forth rotation of her hair armature, combined with the addition of the springiness to the bones, can simulate responses to physical forces on an object and make the animation more realistic. Go back and experiment with different values for the spring strength and see what works for your animation. Adding damping effects. Select the last bone of the hair at the tip, and in the Properties panel, in the Spring section, set damping to 50. The damping value will decrease the rocking of the hair over time. Select the next bone, its parent. In the armature and in the Properties panel, set the damping to its maximum value of 100. Continue selecting bones with strength values and adding damping values to slow the springiness. Choose Control Test to see the effects of the damping values have on the motion of Ruby's hair. The hair still sways, but the motion quickly subsides. The damping values help add a sense of weight to the armature. Adding a nested animation of rotating wheels. Double-click the bicycle frame on the stage. You enter symbol editing mode for the bike frame movie clip symbol, but you're editing in place so you see the other graphics on the stage dimmed. Double-click the back wheel to drill down to the wheel turning movie clip symbol. Select the wheel on the stage and click the Create Motion Tween button above the timeline. Animate creates a tween layer and adds 30 frames. Click inside of the tween, and in the Properties panel, choose Clockwise for rotation. Leave the count at 1x. The wheel automatically rotates on its transformation point, which is the center for one complete clockwise turn. Adding the crank arm. Double-click the Crank Animation movie clip symbol in the library. You enter symbol editing mode for this movie clip. Select the movie clip instance on the stage, or in the first keyframe of the timeline, and choose Create Motion Tween above the timeline. Animate creates 30 frames in a motion tween layer. Add frames so that we have 48 frames. The animation of the crank arm rotating must be synchronized to Ruby's pedaling, so the number of frames must match at 48. Select the tween. In the Properties panel, choose Clockwise for rotate and 1x for count. Animate automatically tweens a clockwise rotation for one turn. Frame 1 and frame 48 are identical, so to make the loop seamless, you'll have to make a slight adjustment. Drag the right edge of the tween to extend the tween to frame 49. Insert a new keyframe at frame 48. Remove frame 49. You still have a total of 48 frames for the rotation, but the end keyframe doesn't repeat the beginning keyframe, and the loop will be seamless. Now go to symbol editing mode for the bike frame movie clip symbol. Add an instance of the crank animation symbol to the front pedal layer. The instance should fit right inside the pink circle. Copy the crank animation instance. Select the back pedal layer and choose Edit, Paste in Place. The Paste in Place command pastes the copied items exactly where you copied them from. Make sure the transformation point is in the center of the crank, and then choose Modify, Transform, Flip Vertical. The instance flips so the crank arm now points downward. If you hide the layers above the back pedal layer, you can see the pedal, its transformation point, and how it flips. However, the crank arm will now rotate counterclockwise. Choose Modify, Transform, Flip Horizontal. The crank animation instance flips horizontally, so now the rotation will continue to turn clockwise. Right-click on the icon in front of the rotation guide layer and choose Properties. In the Layer Properties dialog box that appears, choose Guide for the type and click OK. Exit symbol editing mode and test your movie. Ruby rides her bicycle and the spinning crank arms synchronize with her pedaling. The pink circle that acted as your guide to position her feet and pedals doesn't appear now that they are in a guide layer. Saving an animated armature in the Assets panel. Select the armature layer of the Ruby animation. Right-click and choose Convert Layers to Symbol. In the Convert Layers to Symbol dialog, enter Ruby _bike _animation as the name, and choose Movie Clip as the type, and click OK. Animate saves the armature layer inside a movie clip symbol, which appears in the library. Right-click the new movie clip symbol and choose Save as Asset. In the Save as Asset dialog box, enter a few keywords, separated by commas, that will serve as a searchable reminder of the asset. Since you want to save the graphics, the armature, and the animation, keep Objects, Bones, and Motion selected. Click Save. Animate saves the animation in the Custom tab of the Assets panel. If you choose to save only bones and motion and deselect objects, then your animated armature will be saved to the Assets panel as a rig. Using rig mapping to apply an armature to new graphics. Open 06start_rig-mapping.fla in the 06start folder. The sample file contains 2 characters on the stage, made up of several movie clips. In the Assets panel, choose the Default tab, open the Animated section, and make sure All is selected in both drop-down menus. Locate the Side View Skeleton asset. or the Farmer Green walking asset, and drop it on the selected farmer character instances. If Animate can't map the armature to the graphics automatically, you'll need to manually identify which movie clips instances belong to which bones. The rig mapping panel will appear. Choose the root node, which is the hip. Highlight it in the rig mapping panel. Click the corresponding asset on the stage. When a movie clip instance is matched to its corresponding armature part, both are highlighted in green. Click the next bone and the corresponding movie clip instance on the stage. Continue manually matching up the armature with the corresponding graphics on the stage until the entire rig is complete.